This is the Fifth Estate winning headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you might have missed this morning. But we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 17th of March 2020 and I am 2J.
I am JM.
And I am GK, and in case you missed the headlines, here they are. In the Standard, Mr. President, time to boost economy. In the Star, Matatu's weak link in anti-corona war. And the Daily Nation, coronavirus, unease at the isolation unit.
My word.
Yes.
Right, so can we begin with the Standard?
Yes.
Yeah.
Time to boost the economy.
So I think this is a discussion that I think we knew was going to happen. I think Yatani had even mentioned last week that the economy was going to take a bit of a shock.
Yeah, just like the other ones have.
Just other economies have had.
Yeah.
So I think now this is a real appeal to the president to find a way to help the economy struggle to manage through this hard time.
Buffer us.
Yeah, so I think one important thing we saw yesterday was that there was a meeting with the PSPs and the CBK yesterday where they determined new measures to kind of alleviate some of the stress. So some of the measures we know was that there shall be no charges up to 1,000 shillings on mobile transactions. There's a daily limit increased to 300,000 shillings. Mobile money wallet increased to 300,000 shillings. And the elimination of fees for transfers between mobile wallets and bank accounts, which I thought was very interesting. So you don't have that, moving from one point to another. But an interesting one that I don't think a lot of people picked up on is that there's going to be a reduction of cash in the economy. So the CBK is actually going to be taking some money back to reduce the movement of cash between people.
But the mobile money transactions is supposed to help unlock liquidity so that there's still money moving around
within
the economy.
So you have a lot of businesses who are crying for some kind of rescue from the government. So they're asking for more money flowing into the economy, for interest rates and taxes to be slashed during this period.
It's interesting because a lot of people, especially the wage earners, the people who are on a day-to-day are going to need or have been told to stay at home. Are they going to be paid? Are people going to stand by some of those commitments? We hope that they do, but times are tough.
They are very tough.
They are tough. So I think some of these buffers that the government does will be very useful.
The government should take a hit. Something like reducing or cutting down VAT, suspending that for a bit.
For a little, exactly. That would be helpful.
Many other taxes.
The interesting thing is now that we know government can be so good to us.
Ooh, you guys wait until this corona is over. We're going to be on their case.
I hope someone still fights for some of these things to remain post-coronavirus. I know the capitalists may not agree. But I think that if a government can do this, it means that, there's hope.
They're able to actually be effective.
Yes.
Interestingly, guys, tax season is around the corner.
Yes.
How is that going to happen? I don't know.
And what will that affect the targets that they normally set?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So we have a 3-part criteria that we normally use to break down the headlines. We ask ourselves, is it topical or speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking? And is it effective or thoughtful or just plain lazy?
Good headline.
It's a very constructive headline.
It is.
Direct
appeal to the president.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And then in the Star, here we have Matatu's being pinpointed as the weakest link.
Absolutely, and indeed they are. So this story is telling us that PSVs are supposed to be cleaned and they're supposed to provide hand sanitizers. They're supposed to be washed twice daily. I don't know if that was a directive of the minister. But a spot check by the Star reveals that no hygiene and anti-coronavirus measures have been put in place. The CS additionally had suggested operators should take details of their passengers for easier tracing in the event that corona breaks out.
That's extra.
But the Matatu Owners Association came back saying that's not possible, particularly if passengers are alighting after short distances.
Exactly.
But I do think Matatus are our weakest, one of our weakest links.
Yes.
You can imagine how many people they ferry a day, how many hands are touching just about everything in that Matatu, the conductor, and all the interactions he has.
I think, and I think the important thing this whole incident has brought us to light is that public institutions are really important. And I think we're seeing that from your hospitals to everything. And this pandemic really has no logic, right? Because it's not going to discriminate between the very rich or the very poor. You've seen ministers, prime ministers, and people, and actors, and celebrities, and people like that catching it. And so there's no logic yet. And in that, we're sort of saying it's better to social distance.
Exactly.
That's also so important.
Okay, so shall we park it?
Yes, great headline. So
in the Daily Nation, we have coronavirus, the unease at the isolation unit. And I think, so basically, the testing time is taking very long. Some patients are being kept there for hours. It's causing them anxiety. Basically, we haven't perfected, or it's not as efficient as it could be. Between you being tested and you testing positive or negative, they're trying to avoid the false positive situation.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot going on in terms of that. However, there has been news about a test that could come out that will only take about 10 minutes. And so in about 3 months, we'll be able to see whether that works. There's a UK-based company called MoLogic and a Senegalese research foundation institute called Pasteur de Dakar that could shorten testing time. And I think, and it will also be a cheaper way to test.
In South Korea, they are testing 15,000 people daily.
Wow.
In the United States of America, they're taking 1 week.
I think in that same period they tested those 15,000. The US had tested only 5,000.
Exactly.
So, guys, Kenya, we're doing better than a lot of people.
Actually, Senegal itself, as you're saying, I think they're testing people in record time, in a day or thereabouts.
It says about 36 out of the 54 countries on the continent have the capacity to test for coronavirus.
That's incredible.
Which is pretty good. But the spike in cases is what will cause the problem.
That's true.
They'll be overwhelmed.
So what do we think?
I like the matatus for
I do
giving
as
us
well.
a different angle.
Yes.
I do.
Yeah.
Finally, we give a...
we give a winning headline to the Star finally. Once.
The Star gives us our winning headline. Onto the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country, where we also have a 3-part criteria that we use. We ask ourselves, is it humorous or dry? Is it satirical or pessimistic? And is it effective or just plain lazy? So here we have Ozone of the Star. He's drawn Kenya in the shape of a padlock, or a padlock in the shape of Kenya. And it is locked. And there's a coronavirus approaching it and hopefully not being able to enter. And the caption is COVID-19, most public institutions shall remain closed.
Toss it.
Immediately toss. Only because, yes, the schools have been closed, universities, but there's still a number of places such as churches and other gatherings that I think we really need to clamp down on.
You know, I just liked how visually appealing it was. But beyond that,
I don't want to say it's because you're a man and for you it was very like just on the nose, but
you've said it. All right.
So here we have Gado of the Standard, and he's drawn a caricature of Trump, but his face is the coronavirus. And there's captions there that says ignorance, lies, misinformation, incompetence, fake news, and arrogance.
Again, toss it.
But you have to love Trump's confidence. Just say it with your chest.
But that's the funny thing,
because people will believe you.
For the longest time, Trump was assuring the country that this is just like a common cold, everything is fine, no problem. Then on Monday, he goes back on his words and he then says that this is very bad and that the virus is actually not under control. So I guess you have to...
You know, it's a perception thing.
You have to admire a man.
Politics is about perception. Creating confidence in the nation is also a perception thing. And that's why he had to come out with very bold statements.
But it's funny now how a lot of European countries are saying do not go to the United States, because they have very poor health institutions. They're not taking it seriously.
Absolutely. And who can afford even, I mean, in America, before you are operated in an emergency room, you have to give your medical care, like insurance package,
start paying
details
out.
and stuff like that. So you can imagine, healthcare in America, very inaccessible and unaffordable to many people.
Stay in Kenya.
Partly why, things are not working so well.
So Ndula, this one's a crowded one. We have what looks like a public gathering ban by the Public Health Act being held by Raila in his BBI hat. And behind him is Alice Wahame with her legs sticking out.
She kicking him.
She looks like she's about to kick him. And then on the other side of the divide looks like DP allied MPs and people. So you have Murkomen, you have RUTO himself, you have Moses Kuria, and they're holding the offertory box and they look in distress. They're crying. And on the other hand, you have, I guess, Uhuru allied MPs, where you have Waigoro, or not MPs, but Governor Waigoro, and you have
Atwoli, who are also looking distressed.
And they're gagging Boni Kalwale, poor guy. Man. So everyone, and it says here, confirmed cases of individuals affected by coronavirus. And this is, I guess, in the run-up to the upcoming
Nakuru BBI rally,
which to many was going to be sort of the turning point for what's going on in politics. But now Corona has stopped dragging. okay.
Yeah,
it has, absolutely.
And of course, yeah, they end up being the affected people.
Exactly. I quite like it.
I like it as well.
I think we give this our winning cartoon.
Most definitely.
Sure.
Can we?
It's a good one, absolutely.
There you have it. Daily Nation gives us our winning cartoon.
Corona has cancelled reggae.
Cancelled it completely. What is our final thought?
And now our final thought. Today is inspired by the Spanish Civil War after looking yesterday at a book that looked at the theory of violence of civil war. So the Spanish Civil War was fought in Spain between 1936 and 1939. It's actually known as a trial run war for World War II because World War II started right after the Spanish Civil War ended. So it was fought between the Republicans, who were loyal to the left-leaning Second Spanish Republic, and that was the government of the day, and the Nationalists, which was an alliance of several groups who had come together. It was the monarchists, the conservatives, the Catholic and fascist people who held those views. So just looking at what was happening in the run-up to the Spanish Civil War. Spain had been neutral during World War II. However, that had not made the country any more peaceful or any more prosperous. So in the wake of the ending of World War I, there was a major economic slump around the world. And the working class and the rural poor in Spain suffered greatly during that time. And they began to organize themselves, and that was capitalized on by the communists and the anarchists who then went and decided to lead them. So at this time, you have trade unions in Spain becoming very strong, and there were widespread strikes. And so in the countryside, the impoverished peasants decided to seize land. So when you have peasants seizing land, who does that end up disturbing? The elite. So too much of the elite became worried, and they were afraid that they were on the brink of a communist revolution. So fearing this, you have this military officer called de Riviera. And with the support of the monarchy and the army, he decides to have a coup in 1923, and he becomes a dictator of Spain. So this is almost a whole 10 years before you see the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War. So de Riviera becomes very unpopular with the people because he doesn't focus on alleviating the plight of the poor. And so tensions in the country increase, and he was forced to resign. And this presents a chance for democracy to take hold in Spain. So you have the issuing of the Second Republic of Spain, where they have this new constitution issued in 1931 that was liberal. It guaranteed human rights and basic freedoms. But despite this, there is no stability. So now this is when you begin to see the rise of the left and of the right. So the left included the communists and the trade unions, and they started to push for their agendas. So you have these local strikes and revolts, and these are constantly undermining this democratically elected government. So the left simply could not abide by this elected government, and they started to use violence. So that's the first instance where you see being unheard caused the left to use violence as a way to get their feelings out. So the weakened government eventually collapsed, and elections come in 1936. And they initially have these the left wing is then who is able to get the victory of the day. And they eventually launch these ambitious programs to kind of re-stabilize the government and also redistribute land and money. And this again angers the elite. So then what you have is the right wing choosing, as the left had done before, to use violence as a way to express themselves. And they thought that they were entitled to use violence to kind of like have their needs met. So it's clear then by 1936 that Spain was on the edge of this confrontation between the left and the right. Then you have a series of political assassinations begin, and many call that the turning point for when the Spanish Civil War really ignited. So you have this general, General Francisco Franco, who was stuck in the Spanish Morocco, and he was allied to the right. And he's unable to cross over from the Spanish Morocco into Spain because the navy was allied to the left. And so what happens is that the German government come and they help them, and they have this airlift where they take his Spanish army, which were actually Africans. So don't forget that. Africans helped start the Spanish Civil War. They help him cross over into Spain, and that is what triggers the beginning of the Spanish Civil War that lasted 3 years and killed over 500,000 people.
Wow.
There's a lot of history I've compacted into that.
Absolutely, and I'll go into that a little bit. And I'll tell the story of Francisco Franco. I'll tell the story of the Spanish Civil War through the eyes of Francisco Franco, the strongman of Spain and one of the most brutal dictators of the 20th century. Now, Spain was undergoing a politically turbulent transition in the time that Francisco Franco was born. He was born about 1892. And in 1898, when he's about 6, Spain went to war with the United States for control of its territory, Cuba. And it lost that war. So in that war, Spain's navy, which had been the most prestigious division of its armed forces, was completely obliterated. Franco, who had wanted a military career so bad, was left with no option then but to join the infantry. And so to distinguish himself, Franco chose to go to Spanish-controlled North Africa, that's in Morocco. And so in 1912, in Spanish Morocco, he led troops in quashing a rebellion by Moroccan freedom fighters. And there he resorted to the terror tactics of torture and mass killings, which he would later use on his own people in the Spanish Civil War. So Africa turned out to be a gamble for him because the risk of death was high. And of about 100 of his colleagues who went down there in 3 years, about 1917, only 17 people were alive of his division.
Wow.
But the payoff was huge because it was a place where one could obtain rapid promotion. And indeed, that's what happened. So in 1926, Franco was promoted to Brigadier General. And at the age of 33, he was the youngest general in Europe. So around that time, Spain was a monarchical society, but as you've said, Spaniards were getting new ideas about how they could reform their political system. And so largely dissatisfied by their monarchical system and desirous of a new republic, in 1931, they overthrew the king, Alfonso XIII. They ushered in a republican constitution, as you mentioned. They held democratic elections, and a left-leaning republican government was put in place. But soon thereafter, tables turned. In 1933, Spain swung to the right as conservative parties won the election. Franco was in Spain in the midst of all this, and had was very politically attuned, and he was of the right-wing traditionalist persuasion, and so he was promptly, in that short period of time, promoted to Major General, which happened to be quite an ideal time for the right-wingers. Because the year after that, the socialists staged a massive strike in the western territory, western space of Spain. And now the military called upon Franco to save the day, to restore order. And he now used those tactics that he had acquired in Africa. So he rounded up more than 3,000 Spaniards, he had them shot down, he imprisoned tens of thousands, and so on and so forth. And in response to that brutality, the left-wing parties banded together in a coalition in 1936, as you mentioned. And so they kicked the right-wingers out of government and took control again. And at this time, because they were so afraid of people like Franco and what they had done during that strike, they decided to exile the Francos together with all his allies into places that they still controlled outside of the continent. And so a few weeks later, from the Canary Islands, Franco led the coup to take back Spain from the left-wing control. He went to Morocco first. He assembled the troops that he had fought with in the 20s. And then he looked to Hitler and Mussolini to help him. And so they organized an airlift of men across the Strait of Gibraltar. They made 800 flights, taking 14,000 men across the Mediterranean into Spain. Apparently at the time that was the largest airlift that had ever been done. And within 2 months they took key territories, and he became the commander-in-chief of the armed forces due to his combat experience, political savviness, as well as connections. Consider that prior to this, in those 2 months, he rose from position rank number 23 in the military to rank number 1.
Wow.
Incredible. And in 1939 he seized Madrid, and he became dictator of Spain for about 40 years. In total, 500,000 people were killed in the Spanish Civil War and the years after that. According to Amnesty International, Spain has the highest number of graves in the world. Mass graves in the world after Cambodia. This guy did more damage than Idi Amin.
And yet we don't hear about him as negatively, right?
Absolutely.
So there were a few things that I came up with, or not came up with, but I found out about Franco. He may have spied an opportunity there. So apparently he benefited from the untimely death of his rivals, but also the person who the rebels had actually maybe wanted to be the head of state, right? So they say that Franco didn't originate the plot and was never supposed to lead the country. However, the rebels supported the first choice as General Jose San Giorgio, who died in a plane crash just days after the uprising, while coming in from exile from Portugal. So I don't know if this is true, or if it's a conspiracy, or maybe even if that plane crashing it was orchestrated. And then we have the Republicans. Now the guys he was fighting, the other factions, were also deeply divided, and they refer to it as a civil war within a civil war. The Republican factions were constantly at each other's throats, which also made it easier for him to sort of take over. And then there's both sides committing these atrocities. So we were talking about the logical violence this week. What causes civil war? What causes violence to be meted out in such know, crazy ways? Yeah. And for him, he said, we have to create the impression of mastery, eliminating without scruples or hesitation all those who do not think as we do. So it's very clear in his mind that he had to make sure.
Exactly, and that goes back to the thing in the book, the indiscriminate violence and the selective violence. And that sounds like selective violence where you're targeting people because of how they think or what they know.
Yeah. So much so that he killed in one sitting 4,000 Republicans in one town in a cemetery.
Wow.
And then the other thing is, not only were Moroccans signed up to fight, Americans also signed up to fight. Although it is said that the US government stayed neutral in the Spanish Civil War, about 2,800 Americans actually, who had never even fired a gun before, volunteered for the Republican cause, but didn't fare well. And roughly about 40,000 international volunteers from other countries didn't fare well either. There's also an interesting tidbit about famous writers who wrote around that time.
Yes.
Some even relocating to Spain at the time. So you have Langston Hughes, you have Pablo Neruda, who is famous, you have Ernest Hemingway, who all moved there at the time. But most famously is George Orwell, who survives a bullet. So he goes into Spain trying to combat the fascists, but soon realizes that their ideologies are also quite like divided, and he then didn't know what side he should be on, even though he found himself fighting with for the Republicans. Ends up with a bullet in his head. But the Spanish Civil War influenced the minds of an entire generation and inspired lots of books around that time. And the war was perceived among many intellectuals worldwide as an act of violence by the army against the will of the people. So by the time he's coming in, people already have this feeling about him, right? But interesting times.
Very.
So on a day where we had a winning headline from The Star and a winning cartoon from the Daily Nation, I want to leave you with this. The primary cause of the Spanish Civil War could be that there was a failure in the Spanish democracy, a failure of Spanish political parties and groups to compromise and respect democratic norms. So even as we go into our heated political atmosphere, you know, what will be our logic? Hopefully no violence.
Yeah, and compromise,
Yes, and lots of compromise. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, but find us on TV. We're on GoTV, Prime Free to Air, and Star Times. Have a good evening.